A great pleasure to welcome you to another ACI LAC webinar. This must be webinar number 22 since we started with this series of webinars with the pandemic. And it is a great pleasure to introduce you to BASE and to introduce you to the concept of cooling as a service. I will not say anything about this, and I will let the experts, Dimitris Karamitsos and Carla de la Maggiora, to talk to you about this. But what I would like to say is that ACI and BASE, the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, we have signed an MOU, and this is something that gives me a lot of pleasure because the idea here is to join forces for the benefit of the planet and for the benefit of airports. And that is the beauty of this, of these sort of initiatives, that it is not only good for the environment, but also good for the operations of the airports and for the economic aspect of the airports. I'm really very excited about this MOU, about this relationship with BASE. We are very much looking forward to working together on many projects ahead of us, and also for them to be actually being introduced into the world of airports, which will surely open lots of doors. Without further ado, once again, welcome. I'm very happy to have you on board today, and I will pass on the mic to Francisco Medela, who will explain to you how we will work. Thank you very much. Francisco.
Gracias, Rafael. Simplemente recordarles...
Thank you, Rafael. Just to let you know, like in prior webinars of ACI LAC, the chat option will not be available. So in case you have any question for our panelists, please send your questions to the address you see on the screen. Likewise, as you have been able to test, we have simultaneous interpretation. You must choose the channel of your preference in the Zoom menu. And if you don't want to hear both voices at the same time, the best option is to silence mute original audio. This is in the lower part of the globe. Without any further ado, we give the floor to Carla, who will start. Meanwhile, I give control to Dimitri so he can operate the slides. Go ahead, please, Carla.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone who's joining today's webinar. I'm Carla de la Maggiora from BASE, the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, together with my colleague Dimitris, and we are gonna have the opportunity to talk to you about the servitization model in particular, and then we're gonna focus on something we've been developing that is cooling as a service. And why do we not just think, we know that it's quite relevant for airports. So first of all, I would like to introduce our organization, BASE, Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy. BASE is a foundation, so it's a non-for-profit organization founded almost 20 years ago by the Swiss government and the United Nations Environment Programme. And our main aim is to unlock investments towards like energy efficiency technologies and climate solutions. And for that, what we do is we develop what we call innovative business solutions. So instead of like focusing maybe on developing new technologies, we focus on how we could like operate differently with the current technologies in a way that at the end we help all different stakeholders involved. All these sort of like logos that you see on the right are some of the organizations that we work with. We are like working all around the globe. And we tend to work with like multilateral organizations. We do a lot of like national banks, financial institutions like international and local, development agencies and philanthropic institutions. And then later on, we will talk specifically about the one that is financing our work on cooling as a service. Next one, Dimitris, please. So basically, which are our areas of expertise? Our name somehow tells something when we say Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy. So we focus a lot on the energy side. So we do from innovative business models for renewable, energy efficiency, energy access. We do also electric mobility, and we do also climate finance, okay? And as you see there, this is just a very sort of like quick picture of where we are currently working around the globe. One of these areas that I mentioned is energy efficiency. And in this case, what we are doing is like we develop like these innovative business models and financing mechanism to mobilize investments towards energy efficiency. Okay, and in this case particular, we focus on sustainable cooling solutions for business buildings and home. And in business, airports are clear like an end user that could benefit from this kind of models. Next one, please. So we're going to start by looking at the energy efficiency element and why it's a challenge. And you are an end user, so most of you I would expect, you are like maybe running airports. And you know that in any kind of like equipment, you always have different like technologies available. Some of them currently, you're going to find some that are more efficient than others. So what's the issue? When something usually is more efficient, it tends to be more expensive today. The investment costs tend to be more expensive. However, when we start analyzing the life cycle cost, how much does it cost to operate? How much does it cost to run that equipment? Eventually, we see that over time, in the long term, during the lifetime of that equipment, is cheaper the most efficient equipment. And why? Because most of the expenditures are like basically the payment of utilities, being electricity or water in the case that we're talking about chillers. Next one, please. So what do we have? Another barrier that we know is the fact that when someone comes and tells you, look, this technology is new and is more efficient, people tend to stay with what they already know. Why? Because they say there's always this kind of relationship risk-return. So if I'm going to go into something more risky, I'm going to require like a higher return. So what happens currently? There's a perception of the technology, performance risk of these technologies. So someone comes and tells you, look, if you invest in this equipment, you're going to be saving 30% in energy costs. But that's a promise that someone is telling you, but there's no like sort of like commitment that you're not certain that that's going to happen. So you said, in that case, I'm not so certain that I want to invest in that. So what can we do? Either we provide like a higher return, we can try to develop or engage with technologies that will provide you even a higher savings. So then you start thinking, okay, well, the savings promise are so high that maybe it's worth it. Or we try to control the level of risk, perceived risk. So clearly the return is something that's completely out of our control. But our models, the way we work and what we develop is exactly to work on the perceived risk. And what we're doing is moving from this right thought where we call investment in energy efficiency towards the left. So at the end, for that same level of risk, the expected return required is lower. So you start like these technologies start being more competitive with other alternatives, sort of like investment opportunities for your business. Next one, please. So these are just some few examples of types of innovative business models that we do on energy efficiency. We have something that is quite well known in Latin America and that currently is being implemented in Europe as well. It's called the energy saving insurance. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but you can read a lot about that in our website. Then we have, for instance, on-bill financing, on-wage financing is how to access sort of more efficient equipment, and these are ways of paying for those equipment. And again, that's maybe targeting a different kind of audience. And we have several projects like that in Africa, especially. And then is servitization. And that's going to be the focus of our talk today. And we're going to talk to you why it's so relevant. Next one, please. So first of all, I want to sort of convey the message of why servitization, we call it that this is an innovative and a disruptive business model. And I want to bring you back maybe several years, I don't know, ago. First of all, I want to start with a very basic example. Lots of people, I'm pretty sure here, you drink milk. And I'm pretty sure I would say that most of the people who drink milk not necessarily own a cow. What you do, you go to a supermarket or to your corner shop and you buy the milk. So basically the cow is offering like a product that you get as a service. Okay, so that's the first simple example. If we move like through the years and we start thinking maybe 10 years ago, what did most of us used to do whenever we liked a song? We had the option, let's say we would turn on the radio and sort of hope that the song would be played, or we could go to like a record shop and buy a CD, an LP years ago, then a CD, a cassette, a CD or something like that. What happened with that industry? That then came iTunes and started offering that instead of you having to buy the physical CD, you would buy a digital version of that CD. And even better, you could sometimes just buy the song that you like. So you didn't have to buy the 10 songs So you would save. But then that even evolved even further. Why? Because then iTunes became sort of like the Apple Music or Spotify, where now what I do, I pay for the service, I pay for streaming music, and I just go there and I select what I like, and that's what I hear. So that is why it's innovative, because it's really brought value to a customer, because now I pay an amount of money and I listen to all the music that I want, that before, for listening to the same set of music, I would need to buy maybe 50, 100 CDs, and of course, maybe I don't have the money for doing that. The same has been happening with the industry, let's say, of the cars with Uber, like Cabify, things like that. Instead of you having to own the car, you can use like the car that's being sort of like driven by someone else. And what's the advantage? Like most of us maybe have a car. And what do you do with your car? If you calculate the amount of time that you're using your car throughout the day, maybe it's 5%, 10%. If you live in a city with lots of traffic, that's going to be higher. But it's not going to be like a big chunk. So when you start calculating what's the cost, if I try to measure my cost per like kilometer driven based on my investment that I had to do, is quite high. When an Uber comes, and then you start driving that car, like someone is driving for you, that car may be circulating for many more hours, maybe 8 hours, 10 hours, depending on the driver. So instead of having that asset, the investment sort of parked, I don't know, 70% of the time, you have that park only 50% of the time. So at the end, the cost of investment relative to each kilometer is lower. Okay, so what happens if we start moving now towards with the development of technology? You're really seeing all the news discussion about having like cars that drive without a driver. What is the meaning and what does this translate to? It translates into the fact that eventually we are not going to need like to have the driver. That means that the car can be driving the 24 hours. So we minimize to the maximum that cost per kilometer relative to investment. And that's when we start saying that the business becomes disruptive. And how do you reach that? By doing a lot of investment in research and development. And I really want to give an example. This thing happened some months ago, but I don't remember if you, I don't know, sorry if you remember, like the last launch of NASA of some astronauts to the International Space Station. That happened a few months ago. With the COVID thing, I'm lost of time, but let's say 2-3 months ago. And in this case, what was the business as usual, the traditional model that NASA would do? It was to build these sort of like, I don't know, rockets or space crafts and then send the astronauts. In this case, they didn't do it like that. They worked with SpaceX, the company of Elon Musk, and SpaceX provided the service of transport. So at the end, NASA is really seeing the value in there. Why? Because now they managed to put people in the International Space Station through a service model without having to invest in the actual aircraft or spacecraft. And so we would expect that eventually whenever we have another human stepping on the moon or maybe in another planet, clearly this is showing us that this is going to be through the service model, showing again how the service model is becoming more and more and more embedded into mainstream into our economy. Next one, please. Another comment, another concept that you've been hearing a lot, and maybe some of you more know already a lot, is circular economy. And circular economy is even in Latin America, it's quite relevant, and several governments are really starting to establish like circular economic action plans. So what do we mean by circular economy? First of all, the way we are accustomed to operate, the way that I was like raised, is that you extract something from the earth, you manufacture something maybe with a mineral, and then when that something is not useful anymore for you, like you dispose it. So we have what we call a linear system. We extract, we use, and we dispose. We realize, and everyone knows, that at the end, the earth has limited resources. So the whole aim of the circular economy is to mimic the cycle that happens in the natural world, where no resources are wasted, okay? So servitization is a key element of circular economy. And I really want to sort of prove you why it's like that and why servitization as a broader concept really aligns the interests of people, profit, and the planet. So first of all, when we are talking about a pure servitization business model, if I'm going to tell you with the case of cooling, that I'm going to offer you cooling as a service, Forget about the equipment. This is not a new way of financing an equipment. We are talking about something completely different. We are talking that you forget about the headache of having to deal of buying an equipment and being sure that it's properly maintained. So if you have any issue, you have to repair. For that, you have your own team, and then you outsource the thing. No, you have a company that what provides you is cooling, and you pay for that cooling, for the output, for the units of cooling. When a business, a provider of that service, has to pay not just for the equipment to provide you that service, but also for all the running costs, that means all the maintenance, but all the electricity cost about that. Let me tell you that now that provider has all the incentive to try to maximize efficiency. And if there's someone that is expert in the technology, it's going to be the provider that's using that technology. So they know very clear how to maximize that efficiency. So first of all, they're going to choose an equipment that's very efficient, because now they don't have in their head just selling you an equipment. They have in their head the life cycle of that equipment. And they know that if they look at the cost throughout that life cycle, it's going to be cheaper if they go for the most efficient equipment. Then they're going to try to maintain that equipment to keep it sort of like top-notch, working perfectly. So we move from a more like corrective maintenance towards a more preventive maintenance. So at the end, what is the result of that? That the chance of the equipment failing is reduced. So because of that, at the end, you are getting a better deal. Why? Because you have an equipment that's going to be running really constantly. You already have that the provider is really reducing the cost, is choosing the equipment that's going to minimize the cost for them, and that translates into like a cheaper service, like in terms of cost for you. Okay, so at the end, but at the same time, when we're talking that they are using the most efficient equipment, is that it's going to be equipment that's using less electricity, and by default is less emissions of like CO2 or like greenhouse emissions. Assuming that, of course, you don't have a pure, like, I don't know, renewable, like, source of energy. So at the end, we saw that now the business, it makes sense for the provider, it makes business sense to be efficient. That brings savings to you, and that brings benefit to the planet as a whole. And that, what do? We maximize efficiency. One of the principles of the circular economy is to minimize the amount of like virgin resources, and once the resources are in the economic system, is to try to keep them on the loop. So you have a given amount of energy, you can keep it on the loop longer if you're really minimizing the amount that is required for the different systems to be used. Okay, so another element that is really important, and this comes maybe with a little bit of economies of scale, when a provider has several sort of clients, what do you have? Usually, if you have like a cooling system, and the system, for whatever reason, maybe because your airport is growing, because your needs have changed, you say, okay, the system that I have is not useful anymore, so okay, I'm going to change it. Now that provider, that is the owner of that equipment, has in its mind, instead of me changing the system and I have several customers, what I'm going to do is maybe come with a system that is better fitted for this customer, but what that customer currently has, I can allocate it to some other place. You have more pieces of the puzzle to play with. And because of that, you maximize the usage of that equipment. Okay? And I would say, and that's another way of keeping the resources in the circle, in that economy, like in the circular economy. And then something that is extremely important, when you are also, as a provider, the one responsible for maintaining equipment, and something fails, you don't want to have to remove the whole system and replace it. You want to have to maybe replace that part that is not working. So you start thinking more modular. So in the sense that when something has to change, you can just change, like it's like changing the cartridge of like a printer, where you just press the button, you take out the black ink and you put the new one. So you take out the piece that is not working, and then you put the new one. But also when they receive the equipment back, because whatever numbers of years that equipment is not efficient anymore, they can maximize the reutilization of elements of that equipment. And because of that, you're maximizing the reusing of components. This part, all these three elements are key, because at the end of the day, what you have is that when I mentioned the case of the music, when I mentioned the case of Uber, we were always talking about maybe an asset that is shared by many. So it's a piece of music that is listened by many. In this case, maybe you have an equipment that is not shared by many. You have it in your airport. But still, because of the elements that I just mentioned about how we can maximize efficiency, the usage of equipment, and the reusing of the component, how it makes sense for everyone and everyone gets a benefit. And here I really want to bring the phrase of someone that I really sort of like, I would say, admire. He's a senior manager of CaaS. CaaS is a company that provides cooling in Asia. And I would say it's the leader company in terms of providing cooling as a service. They've been doing this for the last 8 years. And most of the business have like switches towards that, because he says, if you're in an industry that has not got this yet, by this we mean servitization, either be disrupted by it or be the disruptor in it by doing it. You as end users play a great role in this, because things happen when are demanded. So whenever, I'm not just talking about cooling, whenever you need something, let's say a piece of equipment, because that equipment is providing you some kind of service, always ask your providers, can I get this through a service business model rather than just purchasing the equipment? Next one. So this one, and with this one, I'm going to close my part and then I'm going to give it to Dimitris. This is just a curve that's showing how servitization is really being mainstream across the industry. And maybe some of these cases, you know it. A very well-known case across the board is the case of Xerox, where before people or companies used to buy like the printing machines or photocopy machines. You don't do that any longer. What you do is paper copy or paper print. We have the power by the hour of the engines of Rolls-Royce in airplanes. And that's for the whole maintenance. So they ensure that the plane is going to be able to fly because of proper maintenance to those engines. We have compressed air by like also like cubic meters of compressed air. A very well-known case is solar PVs. Solar photovoltaics, I would say maybe the last 30 years or 20 years really, it has sort of like completely changed, because what was required before, if you wanted solar photovoltaics, you need to invest on them. Then a new and very innovative business model came, that is PPAs, power purchase agreements, by which you don't buy. Someone invests for you, they put them on your roof, and what you do is you sign a contract to purchase the energies that's being produced. And that's sort of like skyrocketed that company. We have, like we talk about the mobility, we know the case of lighting, and lighting is very sort of close to airport, because for those of you who do not know, like, and Dimitris may talk about a little bit about that, Schiphol in the Netherlands has like what is called lighting as a service being offered by Signify, former Philips. And then we have the cooling as a service that and I really want to stress this part, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we are a foundation. And as a foundation, we really keep a neutral position in this. We don't make money by anyone buying any kind of like cooling equipment, by anyone providing any kind of cooling equipment. We're completely agnostics about the brands. We do work with many different technology providers, because our only aim is to show that the model works. And this should be adopted on its own by the market, because it's really market driven. There are no subsidies here, there's nothing. And how do we finance ourselves? Because of philanthropy. Philanthropy is really keen on recognizing that something has to be done with cooling. So with this, I'll pass it on to you, Dimitris, and then we're going to be at the end open for any questions. Thanks. Dimitris, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Yes, perfect. So thank you very much, Carla. To follow up on what Carla just mentioned, and to take a little step back on why did we start focusing in the cooling industry. So here I would like to give you a little bit more background on the cooling industry market and the importance of it. So not everybody knows, but actually the cooling industry represents today about 10% of global energy consumption. So it's actually really in the backbone of many industries. It's very present in airports, as you know, but it's going from hotels to industries to real estate, etc. And that consumption is estimated to triple in the next 30 years. So as a generic trend, what we see throughout the markets, whether you are in developing economies or developed economies, businesses tend to have a similar reaction to innovation, like Carla mentioned, and they don't engage with the best technologies on the market. So typically you have HCFCs and HFCs, which are used, so refrigerant gases, which are very harmful for the environment. So they are the equivalent of several thousands of tons of CO2, and they emit huge emissions in the environment. And on top of that, of course, these systems are very often not energy efficient. So what we see as a generic trend is that companies engage with technologies that are about 40 to 60% less energy efficient than the technologies that they have available in their particular market. And so, of course, you can imagine as these businesses scale, that represents not only a huge risk on the climate, but as well on the grid. So the grid and the investors looking at inside a country need to invest into the grid upstream from the usage of the energy to be able to sustain the demand in energy consumption. And so here we really, as an entity, want to stress the importance of energy efficiency and how energy efficiency is also highly linked to renewable energy, because the more efficient you have on the market, technologies working on the market, the more you can actually shift also your focus and invest into renewable energies that can produce energy, clean energy, to make these systems run. So if I go here on the next slide, what is very important to mention, and that was also touched briefly by Carla, is that actually systems that are energy efficient have a clear cost-benefit analysis. So if you look at the cost breakdown of cooling equipment, about 90% of the costs are actually related to operation and maintenance. And the cost of the equipment is just a fraction of it. But even though this is happening, we realize, like I just mentioned, that businesses don't engage with the best technologies out there, so the ones that are more energy efficient. And the core reasons for this were mentioned by Carla as well. Here it's summarized in 4 key bullet points that we notice across industries, and probably you will feel familiar with those 4 bullet points as well. So the first one is, of course, the better technology is more expensive to buy upfront. The second part is that there is really a lack of trust in this performance. So when you have a technology provider that comes to you and says, you will save that amount of money after X amount of years, you have really an uncertainty whether this will be happening, and you try to circumvent that uncertainty with terms and conditions in contracts, etc., which delays also your decision making and might as well make you shift towards the technology that you're more familiar with. Third of all, you have really, of course, you need to prioritize into your core business. So you take what is more important to run your business and you invest in that as a first hand, especially when we are in a situation like today, where we're coming out of a pandemic. And as we know, like the aviation industry has been drastically hit. So you need to see where you're gonna be investing next. And the fourth point is that maintenance is very often overlooked and the spare parts are not available. So typically when you engage with a new technology, you also have fear, of course, that if there is a breakdown, when are the companies will be able to repair that part, which means how long will your business be also offline, so to say. So for all of these reasons, you don't engage typically on new, innovative, state-of-the-art technologies. So the solution we brought on the market, and for the reasons that Carla mentioned, is the servitization model in the cooling space. So it's really the shift for technology providers to sell an equipment towards selling a service. So operationally, for technology providers, it is a challenge to make that shift. But as Carla mentioned as well, if there is a demand from the market, bringing that demand, the technology providers have to make a shift. And so our role in the market has always been to educate the technology providers to be able to make that shift and to provide that technology as a service. So the model we've designed, which is called Cooling as a Service, was actually also endorsed by the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance last year, which is, it's a very thorough process of financiers, experts in the industry that are analyzing different models provided to them with opportunities for green financing, but as well models that enable impact towards climate change. And so what they do in a nutshell is that they really analyze through these different models that they receive, and they endorse the business models where they see a strong value from market entry perspective and also an impact on the climate. So to give you a little bit of more explanation on how the model works, it's like was mentioned earlier, a pay-per-use model. So the providers keep ownership of the equipment. It's really a shift from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. And really it aligns the incentives for efficient production and efficient consumption. Because with that model, the technology provider basically have all the incentives to run their systems efficiently, to maintain them efficiently, because as soon as the system stops working, basically you stop paying for the service because you don't get it, right? And it also, very importantly, exposes the life cycle cost competitiveness of the best technologies. Because from day one, you have access to the cheaper total cost of ownership of the equipment. So to relate it a little bit to different models that are available on the market, the first one that is often being compared to the cooling as a service model is the energy performance contracting. Now, the key differentiator with energy performance contracting is that in such a contract, typically the energy provider is listing contractually the energy savings that you will be doing throughout your operation. But the issue there is that, let's say, throughout the contract, you run your systems more efficiently and you increase your savings. At the end of the year, there is always a negotiation happening between the technology provider and the user on who will take 50% or how much percentage of those additional savings that are reached. So there is always a hurdle between the technology provider and the end user, which brings a lack of trust and transparency between the stakeholders. The second model is, of course, district cooling. And district cooling is, in a nutshell, the best case scenario. So it's a model that also enables high efficiency, but the difficulty there is that you need a large infrastructure for district cooling. And for cooling as a service, the difference there is that you can really do it for one of your buildings, or if you scale up one of your airport units, you can implement it there. So you don't need to change your whole infrastructure. So who are the key actors involved in cooling as a service? Of course, you have yourself, so the airports, the cooling users, the technology providers, and the banks, so the investors. So what are the advantages for each? So for the airports, the benefits are very clear. First, it's you have a direct access to mature climate mitigation solutions. So we're speaking here about cooling, because this is also where we brought our expertise, but with conversations that we have with ACI LAC, we see the value, of course, in lighting, we see the value in heating, we see the value in transport as a service, so electrical buses, solar PVs, and so on. And every time you have the similar advantages, which is no capital expenditure, you have reduced operating expenses due to the more competitive total cost of ownership, you have a service which is completely off balance, you have no more performance risks, because you don't have to take care of those performance risks. It's the technology provider's responsibilities. Then you have a full outsourcing of cooling services. And this, again, here I want to stress that point, that I'm aware that certain airports have their internal crews who are taking care of certain equipment. And there it's again on a case-by-case discussion with the technology providers on how to fit the two teams together. And lastly, you can of course focus and invest into your core business priorities, which is safety of your passengers and comfort of your passengers running through the airports. For the technology providers, one point that is very important, of course, is that they can deploy the full potential of their technology. So they're the experts in what they've been creating into their research and the development pipeline. They know how their system is running, so they can really perform their system to their best level. They can increase the demand, of course, for energy efficient solutions. And they can, of course, which is beneficial as well, predict continuous revenue streams, which for them in situations like today with COVID-19, for instance, is having a very large impact on their business as well. And then, of course, it brings additional value by selling outcome instead of selling equipment and parts. And here, one point I want to bring in addition as well is the value of digitalization. So today, a lot of these technology providers are trying to bring to you the value of data and of digitalization, but for you, it's not your core business. So the advantage of investing in it is sometimes challenged, can be challenged. Whereas here for the technology provider, it's in their incentive to have these systems connected, to be able to predict the degradation of each part and be predictive into maintaining the whole system. Now, if we look at investors, of course, for them, the opportunity is to place green funding, which a couple of years ago was not available. And today there is really priority into ESGs and how to place funding in a more sustainable manner. They have the opportunity, of course, to be the front runner to finance servitization models and to invest into assets generating cash flows. And one point here that I added is that globally, the market of cooling, like I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, is really growing, and it represents for the next 30 years, $6.9 trillion of US dollars of investments, which if on top they're green, it's a very strong prioritization for them. So to very briefly to say how we are actually funding that cooling as a service initiative, and Carla mentioned it briefly as well. It's actually funded by the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, which is a program that was funded really to phase out bad refrigerants from the market and rather really promote the ones that are cleaner and improve energy efficiency of cooling. And as an NGO, where we have been really focusing is on 4 pillars. The first one is we created the Cooling as a Service Alliance. The Cooling as a Service Alliance has been created to create trust in the markets. So for instance, our partnership with ACI LAC is part of this alliance to be able to reach out to you airports and to communicate the advantage of the cooling as a service model. And so within the alliance, we have as well, of course, the technology providers such as Daikin, Train, Carrier, but also smaller ones like Coolbox or EnergyWorks, which are all there to adopt the model inside their operations. And then as well, we have outreach partners such as ACI LAC, but as well, we have the Rocky Mountain Institute or United for Efficiency, Efficiency for Access, and of course, as well, the World Green Building Council. And all of these partners are there to help us reach out to the end customers. The second part of the pillar is the creation of the core tools of cooling as a service. The first one is the off-balance cooling as a service contract, which was developed with very well-known law firms, which really checked with us that the contract was compliant according to the latest IFRS 16 considerations. And that was stress tested together with technology providers who we collaborated very closely with. Second of all is the pricing model. So we developed the pricing model together with the lab, right, which endorsed the model of cooling as a service. And together with them, we really evaluated each scenario that a customer could have between purchasing a low energy efficient system, using their current low efficiency system, or going towards the purchase of a high energy efficient system and comparing it to receiving it as a service. And as you see here, and that of course is for a particular system in a particular infrastructure, but that example showed that cooling as a service in each scenario was more cost advantageous. And this is again because the technology providers are the ones that know how to run their system to in the best way possible. So here are the third pillar is what we call the cooling as a service demos. And you see that actually the different regions where we've been active have been chosen on purpose. So we are active in Latin America, in the African continent, and also in Asia, because we wanted to stress test the business model towards factors involving geography, industries, and also local economies. And what we've been seeing is that in each of the different scenarios, the model is providing very strong benefits. So you see that, for instance, in Latin America, we've been applying the model in more industrial, commercial infrastructure. In Africa, we have also the examples of off-grid cold storage, which is very active in agriculture, and actually also active in Mexico. And in India, where we have, again, industrial, commercial, and cold storage, so a mixture of both. And actually, the company that Carla mentioned, CaaS, is active in Singapore, Malaysia, and in India. And we see that in each locations, again, the model is providing strong benefits. Here is just to give you, we have several case studies, and here it's one I wanted to expose because it's similar to applying cooling as a service in a large infrastructure. That project was run in Colombia, and the building is today operating normally. And it was a retrofit from an old chiller system to a new system provided as a service. And to keep the case study very short, the key benefits was that the customer from day one was having an access of energy savings of 1.2 gigawatt hours a year. And more importantly as well, it enabled a greenhouse gas emission reductions of not less than 440 tons of CO2 per year. So quite a big shift. And always remember, you get access to this from day one of operation, right? Because you don't have to do the upfront investment to install the technology. The fourth pillar where we are very much active is on raising awareness of the model. And similarly to what we're doing today here, this webinar, this is part of webinars, articles, publishing case studies, and very importantly as well, it's running, I'll get back to that in a second, a global cooling as a service e-summit, where the purpose of it is to have an entire day event. So actually this event will be happening on the 1st of December, where we will be gathering different stakeholders involved in cooling as a service. So going from technology providers to end users to investors to be able to expose their relationship with cooling as a service and their experience with cooling as a service. So actually that event is, as you see, planned in a little bit more than a month. So if you have the opportunity to register, we highly encourage you to do so. And there will be also a session where ACI LAC will be speaking about the potential benefits again of cooling as a service for airports. And it's also an opportunity for you to be there to raise questions and to see how you could further engage yourself with cooling as a service. And then what we see is that throughout the 2 years where we've been growing this initiative and implementing the different projects that we have, is that we've seen really an increasing of awareness on the market. So for instance, The Economist has been speaking about the opportunity of cooling as a service for the climate and for businesses around the world. but also the World Green Building Council has been promoting it. The UK government has been underlining the opportunities into engaging with that model. And as well, Sustainable Energy for All has been really underlining that model as a disruptive business model for sustainable cooling. So with this, I would like to close the presentation and open the floor for questions. But I would let you know that if you want to get engaged and know how you can implement cooling as a service or servitization models, get in touch with us. This is the core reason why we also signed the MOU with ACI LAC, is to be able to bring that solution to airports in Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you very much. And on this, I let the floor to questions.
Muchas gracias, Dimitris.
Thank you very much, Dimitris, for the presentation. Please, I remind you that the questions for Dimitris or Carla, please send them to the email address on your screens. We already have a few. And maybe to remind the airports, Dimitris, how can they get involved with cooling as a service? What would be the procedure if they're interested? Besides getting in touch with you, can you explain briefly how the airports could get involved in the concept?
Shall I take the answer? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Can you hear me? Yes. So the process is the following. So like you correctly mentioned, very good to reach out to us. As Carla mentioned, we are totally technology agnostic. So we will be in a neutral position to give you, let's say, advices on how to proceed forward. But then typically in the alliance that I mentioned, these are all companies that are actively implementing cooling as a service, that maybe some of these companies you already collaborate with. And if not, and you have a preference towards also a technology provider that you trust or that you're already engaging yourself business-wise, we can approach that technology provider as well and educate them towards making the shift.
Perdón, y ahora voy a hablar
adelante.
en español para complementar un poquito.
Excuse me, I will speak in Spanish at this moment. I think if I go back to the way we operate, I will emphasize the fact that in this case, all the development of cooling as a service has been because of the philanthropic support of the cooling efficiency program. I think one of the big issues here is why we decided to sign the MOU with ACI LAC is because we see that there are truly many opportunities out there with other technologies too, where energy is a relevant issue. Thereby, we see that there's a possibility to even set up a project. The way we operate, we look for a philanthropic project. When we knock on doors, we want to see market interest. This is why the importance that airports, for instance, they say, I'm interested in the service, yes. And in this measure, we formalize this, and then a specific possibility arises, not only maybe to develop cooling as a service, but also efficient output for a service for airports as a service or something like this. I think this is important to be clear on this.
Si me permites, no, si me permites.
If you allow me, I'm Rafael Echeverni. Once again, the truth is I'm very pleased to see we had 90 persons besides the presenters listening to us. And what we wanted to do with this presentation was to introduce this concept, because as Carla explained really well, there are things that we all know. For instance, the Xerox example, the photocopying machines, but this is already expanding into other many other aspects, industry in general. So with this presentation, we introduce this concept to the airports because, of course, when I started to talk with BASE in Switzerland about this, when we started our discussions, well, many possibilities started to open up in my mind that airports could access. And what I wanted to do with this presentation was plant this seed so you start thinking and you realize the great opportunities we have. And as I was saying, BASE is not affiliated with any company. What they will do is help us so that the idea of the concept becomes into something real. And they'll get us in touch with whomever we need to be in touch. We know it's a bit complicated to have too many questions in this webinar, but please send your questions because Carla and Dimitri certainly will answer you back. Thank you, Rafael. Yes, we have some questions from Ariel Arias, San Jose, Costa Rica. Okay, based on the presentation and the charts, the graphs you showed, we see the cooling as a service is it's a great opportunity to have efficient cooling. How do you, the question is, how do you measure the current energy efficiency in the terminals or buildings where your system is installed? Well, I will take this question. What's important here is we apply a slogan, the expert in an area will do what he must do. In this case, the expert here is the service provider, the technology provider. This is why it's not us, but in this case, it would be a technology provider. In the case of Costa Rica, where we are working with the Grupo Clima, they know the concept. They developed together with us a local contract, and they have all their experts, engineers, and we will inform them how this will be measured and so forth. Thank you, Carla. We have another question about the concept itself. A question that just reached us. How quickly can you implement this project at an airport? How fast? How quickly? Based on your experience at an airport or any other infrastructure. Once again, it depends in this case on the country, or on the service technology providers they have the expertise and know cooling as a service. In Costa Rica, there's a contract already developed. They have some knowledge here. It's extremely quick in this case because they must go into the same negotiation process like when they're purchasing equipment because there will be an audit or a procurement system of what they truly need. They must understand, the provider must understand what the customer needs or wants, so they can include this in their package service, equipment that will generate what the customer is seeking or looking for. So the time frames are not different from buying equipment. The only difference, obviously, if we're talking about a country where, let's say, they don't have a developed contract already, it'll take us more time. Having said this, I need to emphasize that in the beginning, we talked about the tools, the contract of balance and so forth. All these tools are public, free access. You go to the webpage of CaaS, CaaS, .org, you can download them, and any lawyer can look into them and adjust them to the local laws. Contracts are developed and they're adjusted accordingly. Thank you, Carla. Another question from Adriano from Sao Paulo GRU Airport. He's asking if he had available case studies for them to evaluate maybe, and And once what is the process for affiliation? And if there are airports already that had implemented this service around the world, specifically cooling. You mentioned lighting and Schiphol, but can you answer, please? Thank you. Well, we have a series of cases. No airports yet, I'll be honest, because the idea is we're looking for the right model. At the industry level, we have many manufacturing industry, data center, pharmaceutical. Yes, but this is where it's important to establish and be clear on the spectrum, the scope that cooling as a service has. Because when we showed you the geography map, we talked about cold storage rooms, we talked about cold storage chains for vaccines or other things too, and big industry. And airports are big industry. I think Dimitri mentioned a building in Medellin, Colombia, because it's a case study in a big infrastructure. So it's something we can relate airports to. There are other case studies published in our webpage, free access, focused on different elements of this spectrum or scope, maybe more on the industrial area, buildings and so forth. And the idea basically is that we recognize, we know that we have a great potential at the airport level. I would like to say that under the current COVID conditions, what people want at this moment is to generate operational aspects and to do this without investing. It's a treasure, it's a gold mine. Servitization will get you all this. Not only servitization for cooling though. And something I want to emphasize here, we did not mention and it's relevant. When we said that the supplier at the end owns the equipment and pays for all the buying electricity and so forth, well, it's not only about getting you the most efficient equipment, maintaining, having better preventive maintenance and better correction aspects. People start thinking systematically. Maybe people will think if it's cheaper, electricity is cheaper at night, well, maybe we have the systems like use this surplus during the day. Maybe normally in a hospital or airport, people don't think like this. They just think cooling equipment, this is it. But these are the types of extra things that make it at the end that this service is even more competitive. I wanted to add this.
No, it's very good. And if I may add as well, in the case studies that we have, so Carla mentioned that, for instance, the example I mentioned in Medellin, we do have also in other locations kind of large warehouses or industrial companies that have structures which have a lot of similarities with infrastructures in airports. And so there are very often similar questions that come on the table, which can be also related to what are the terminal point interfaces between the technology provider and your ownership of your assets. So how do the pipe connect and all these? So these are all similarities that have been taken into consideration inside the model, and where the technology providers that we are collaborating with have the knowledge on how to do that. So that's a very important point. And then as well, an additional point I wanted to mention, it's related to the price of electricity, of course, which in this situation, if you look at large buildings, because it's taken into consideration by the technology provider, so the cost that they basically charge you per month envelops the equipment, the maintenance, the service, the price of electricity, the price of water. They really, again, have the incentives to make it run efficiently. So maybe
Puedo complementar algo que tiene relación con lo que presentó en cuanto al e-summit.
I want to complement something in regard to the e-summit. Dimitris mentioned our idea in the e-summit is to bring here all different issues or topics, how servitization is being mainstreamed within our economic systems or circular economies, but also to involve all the different stakeholders in real projects too. And you're going to see not only presentations, the participants can interact to get involved directly. So there will be a great opportunity to access information directly online. And this event is free for anyone to participate. I want to emphasize this. There's nothing better than asking a question directly to a customer, to a provider, a supplier. It's great to do this. Thank you. At the end also, during this afternoon, you will be receiving the YouTube link with the presentation in English and Spanish and the slides still. And we will include a link so you have more information about the e-summit and you can register. And last, related, and will depend on each case, but we have one last question. What would happen at the end of the contract? For instance, the equipment would belong to the airport, or how would this work out at the end of the contract? How would this work out at the end? The idea here, no, the equipment belongs to the provider, no, and it's not established that it'll go to belong to the airport or the customer. We would expect if there's an established relationship, a quality relationship, we expect that what the customers want is a quality service at the end. So maybe the supplier at the end might have a better offer with the newest equipment. Well, and since the supplier will continue maintaining the equipment, so there will be constant renovation or maintenance. Maybe if the equipment dies at the end, sometime in the future, well, cooling as a service will replace it, signing a new contract, maybe under different conditions, depending on the installed capacity. If the installed capacity is similar, it will be maybe a similar price. But if maybe at the end you want to double your cooling capacity, so the contract will change. This is not a leasing. I want to be clear on this. I want to be emphatic. Cooling as a service, servitization, will not become a financial instrument to finance equipment. No, we're changing totally the paradigm. We're not selling equipment and in the traditional way. Now we offer a service.
Mm-hmm. And if I may add to that as well, so what we've been seeing on the market for the past several years is that the customers that were initially with the mindset, let's say, to potentially purchase the equipment at the end of a contract, so they were negotiating on the terms and conditions to include that option. After, let's say, the 7 years of contracts, which, by the way, can be stopped in between, so you don't have, let's say, a fixed obligation to continue, let's say, the whole period of the contract, right? If you're not happy with the technology provider, you have the option to terminate that relationship, which also brings additional pressure to the technology provider to really provide you with the best service, because if you're not happy, you can terminate the contract. And what we've seen on the market is that the customers that were thinking of, let's say, at the end of the life of the contract, basically potentially own the equipment, they rather preferred to continue with the model as a service, because the technology provider is bringing so much value from the service side. So meaning, upgrades, if they have a new system coming into their pipeline of portfolio of equipment, they can bring it more easily and implement it more easily into the system. So you as a user, you automatically benefit of all these advantages. And so what we see as a trend is that actually users, so customers, they rather continue engaging with the as a service model, which is also what we wanted to achieve as well from the model as a service. And one point I wanted to add, and you will have the opportunity also to see that at the e-summit, is with all the customers that we are approaching. So for instance, if we show the building in Medellin, that's a good example. A customer that is, let's say, benefiting from cooling as a service, automatically it's an infrastructure that might benefit from light as a service, from heating as a service, from other equipment provided as a service. And here, this is the interesting part as well, is that by you engaging with that model, you open the gates to basically provide other types of equipment under a similar model. And as you know, like if you have energy efficient lights that can be up to 60% more energy efficient on your electricity bill at the end of the month, that becomes very appealing if you can combine cooling, lighting, heating, etc. So that's the last point I wanted to mention, which is important to consider.
Muchas gracias, Dimitris. Con esto.
Thank you very much, Dimitris. So with this, we don't have any more time. We are a bit above our time. I want to remind you, we will be sharing the slides in the recording of today's session. And without any further ado, I want to thank Dimitris and Carla for their time in preparing this presentation and sharing this concept with us. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. Well, may you have a great day. I hope it was of great interest. Thanks to everyone. Have a great day.